The sound of rough laughter cut through the crisp Montana air like a blade through silk, and Jonas Mackenzie felt his jaw tighten as he guided his pack horse down the mountain trail toward the town of Silver Creek in the autumn of 1878. Jonas was a man carved from the mountains themselves, standing well over 6 feet with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and arms thick with muscle earned from years of trapping beaver and wrestling supplies through the rugged wilderness. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather, and his beard was full but trimmed close enough to reveal the sharp angles of his face. At 32 years old, he had spent the last decade in these mountains, preferring the company of pine trees and elk to the chaos of civilization. But even a mountain man needed supplies, and twice a year he made the trek down to Silver Creek to trade his furs and stock up on coffee, ammunition, and the few other necessities he could not fashion with his own hands. The town sprawled before him in the valley, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a muddy main street. Silver Creek had grown considerably since his last visit in the spring, swollen with miners chasing rumors of a new silver strike in the nearby hills. Jonas could see the evidence everywhere. Fresh lumber frames rising where tents had stood before, more horses tied to hitching posts, and far more people milling about than he remembered. The laughter came again, harsher this time, followed by jeering voices. Jonas rounded the corner past the livery stable and saw the source. 4 men stood in a loose semicircle near the back of the general store, where laundry lines stretched between wooden posts. They were rough-looking characters, the kind that drifted from mining camp to mining camp, wearing dirt-caked clothes and sporting scraggly beards that spoke of poor hygiene rather than deliberate style. At the center of their attention was a young Chinese woman, visibly pregnant, her belly swollen beneath a simple blue cotton dress. She held a basket of wet laundry against one hip, her face turned downward as she tried to ignore the men surrounding her. Jonas could see her hands trembling even from 20 yards away. "Look at that, boys," one of the men said, loud enough for half the street to hear. "The Chinaman's wife is fat as a sow. Wonder which one of them railroad coolies is the father. Probably do not even know herself." The others laughed, and another man stepped closer to the woman, forcing her to back up against the wooden post. "My ma always said their babies come out yellow as buttercups. That true, China doll? You gonna pop out a little yellow baby?" Jonas felt heat rising in his chest, the kind of slow-burning anger that had gotten him into trouble more than once in his younger days. He had learned to control it over the years, to channel it into productive work like splitting wood or hauling water. But watching grown men torment a pregnant woman brought it roaring back to the surface. He tied his horses to the nearest post and walked toward the group with deliberate steps. His boots made no sound in the soft mud, but his shadow fell across the men before he spoke. "Seems like 4 grown men ought to have better things to do than harass a woman trying to do her work," Jonas said, his voice low and steady. The men turned, and Jonas could see the calculations happening behind their eyes as they took in his size, the knife at his belt, and the confidence in his stance. The one who had spoken first, a wiry man with a crooked nose, sneered. "This ain't your business, mountain man. We are just having a bit of fun. The Chinese don't mind. They do not understand half of what we say anyway." Jonas looked past the men to the woman, who had raised her eyes to meet his. They were dark and almond-shaped, beautiful despite the fear swimming in them. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with delicate features and black hair pulled back in a simple bun. Something in her gaze spoke of intelligence and dignity that these fools were too stupid to recognize. "I think she understands just fine," Jonas said, "and I think you boys should apologize and move along." The crooked-nosed man laughed, but it sounded forced. "Or what? You planning to take on all 4 of us?" Jonas did not answer with words. He simply shifted his weight slightly, letting his coat fall open to reveal not just the knife, but also the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. More importantly, he let them see the absolute absence of fear in his eyes. He had faced down grizzly bears and mountain lions, had survived winters that would have killed softer men, and had long ago made peace with his own mortality. These town bullies, for all their bluster, were nothing compared to the dangers he navigated every day in the high country. The silence stretched out for several heartbeats. Then, one of the other men, younger and clearly less committed to the confrontation, tugged at the crooked-nosed man's sleeve. "Come on, Ned. Ain't worth it. Let's go get that drink you were talking about." Ned held Jonas's gaze for another moment, then spat in the mud near the woman's feet. "This ain't over, mountain man. Nobody tells me what to do in this town." "Seems like I just did," Jonas replied calmly. The men shuffled away, throwing dark looks over their shoulders but unwilling to escalate further. Jonas watched until they disappeared around the corner of the saloon, then turned his attention to the woman. She was still pressed against the post, clutching her basket so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Are you all right, madam?" Jonas asked, softening his voice considerably. She nodded slowly, then seemed to gather herself and straightened her spine. "Yes, thank you. They have not hurt me. Not today." Her English was accented but clear, and Jonas noted the implication in her words. Not today suggested there had been other days when things had gone differently. "I am Jonas Mackenzie," he said, offering a slight nod since he suspected she would not be comfortable shaking hands with a strange man. "I come down from the mountains a few times a year for supplies." "I am Mei-Lin Chen," she replied, returning his nod with a small bow of her head. "I do washing for the town, and mending. My husband, he worked on the railroad, but he died 2 years ago. Rockslide." Jonas felt a pang of sympathy. He knew the statistics. The railroad companies had brought thousands of Chinese workers to build their lines through the mountains, and the death toll had been staggering. Rockslides, explosions, falls from cliffs. The Chinese workers had been assigned the most dangerous jobs and had died in numbers that would have sparked outrage if they had been white men. "I'm sorry for your loss," Jonas said. "A rockslide is a hard way to go." Mei-Lin's eyes flickered with surprise, as if she had not expected genuine sympathy from a white stranger. "Thank you. He was a good man. Now I must work to live, and soon there will be a baby to feed." She touched her swollen belly protectively, and Jonas felt another surge of anger at the men who had been tormenting her. She was alone, pregnant, and trying to make an honest living in a town that clearly did not value her presence. "Those men bother you often?" he asked. Mei-Lin hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. Many people in town, they do not like Chinese. They say we take jobs from white men. They say we are not Christian. They say many things." She paused, then added quietly, "Mostly they just ignore me. But some, like those men, they like to make trouble." Jonas glanced down the street, already forming a plan. He could not stay in town indefinitely to protect her, but perhaps he could make enough of an impression that the troublemakers would think twice before harassing her again. "I need to conduct some business in town," he said. "Might take me a couple of days. Would you mind if I checked in on you before I head back up to the mountains, just to make sure those fellows are not causing you any more problems?" Mei-Lin studied him with those intelligent dark eyes, clearly trying to determine his motives. Jonas stood still and let her look, knowing he had nothing to hide. Finally, she nodded. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Mackenzie. I live in a small cabin behind the laundry yard, the one with the blue door. You will know it by the clotheslines." "I will find it," Jonas promised, "and please just call me Jonas." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the worry and fear. "Then you must call me Mei-Lin, not Madam. I'm not so old as that." Jonas found himself smiling back. "Mei-Lin it is, then." He helped her hang the rest of the laundry from her basket, ignoring the curious and disapproving stares from passers-by. Once the clothes were secured on the line, Mei-Lin thanked him again and made her way toward a small cabin he could just see at the edge of the property. Jonas watched her go, noting the way she moved carefully to accommodate her pregnancy and the proud set of her shoulders despite everything. Then he turned his attention to the business that had brought him to town. He needed to trade his furs at the general store, stock up on supplies, and find somewhere to stable his horses for a night or two. But in the back of his mind, he was already thinking about Ned and his friends and the ugly hatred in their voices. Men like that were a disease, spreading poison wherever they went. Jonas had dealt with their kind before, usually by avoiding them. But something about Mei-Lin's situation had gotten under his skin, and he found himself unwilling to simply look the other way this time. The general store was crowded with customers, mostly miners and their families. Jonas had to wait his turn to speak with the proprietor, a portly man named Harold Jessup, who had been running the place for as long as Jonas could remember. Harold's eyes lit up when he saw the quality of the furs Jonas had brought. "These are fine pelts, Jonas," Harold said, running his hands over a particularly luxurious beaver pelt. "You have been having a good season up in the mountains." "Good enough," Jonas replied. "The streams are running clean and the beaver populations are healthy. I try not to overtrap any one area." They negotiated a fair price, and Jonas used part of his credit to stock up on coffee, flour, salt, sugar, ammunition, and a few other necessities. He also purchased some items he did not strictly need but thought might be useful: a sturdy woolen blanket, some dried fruit, and a thick winter coat that would fit a smaller person. Harold raised an eyebrow when Jonas added the coat to his pile. "Expecting company up in your cabin this winter, Jonas?" "Just thinking ahead," Jonas replied neutrally. In truth, he was not sure why he had bought the coat. Mei-Lin's thin dress had looked inadequate for the Montana winter that was rapidly approaching, and something in him wanted to make sure she had what she needed. He told himself it was simple Christian charity, the kind of thing any decent person would do. But there was something else too, something he was not quite ready to name. He left most of his supplies with Harold to be picked up the next day, then made his way to the boarding house where he usually rented a room when he was in town. The proprietress, a stern widow named Mrs. Harriet Fletcher, had a room available and served a decent evening meal for her boarders. Jonas paid for 2 nights and went upstairs to wash off the trail dust and change into cleaner clothes. That evening, he sat down to dinner with the other boarders in Mrs. Fletcher's dining room. The conversation centered on the new silver strike and the flood of prospectors it had brought to the area. Jonas listened more than he talked, picking up useful information about which areas of the mountains were seeing increased activity and which trails might be getting crowded. He made a mental note to adjust his trap lines accordingly, moving farther north where the influx of miners was less likely to disturb the wilderness he depended on. After dinner, Jonas excused himself and walked through the town as the sun set behind the mountains. Silver Creek came alive at night, with lights blazing from the saloons and the sound of tinny piano music drifting on the evening air. Jonas avoided the main entertainment district and instead made his way toward the quieter residential area where Mei-Lin's cabin stood. He found it easily, just as she had described. It was small, barely more than a single room with a slanted roof, but it was tidy and well maintained. A lamp burned in the single window, casting a warm glow into the gathering darkness. Jonas hesitated at the edge of the property, suddenly unsure of his purpose. What was he doing here? Checking on her, yes, but there was more to it than that. Something about Mei-Lin had captured his attention in a way that surprised him. Before he could decide whether to approach or retreat, the door opened and Mei-Lin stepped out, carrying a basin of water. She saw him immediately and froze, clearly startled. Then recognition dawned and she relaxed slightly. "Jonas," she said, and he liked the way his name sounded in her accent. "You came." "I said I would," he replied, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure those men had not come back to bother you." "They have not," Mei-Lin confirmed. She poured the water onto a small vegetable garden beside the cabin, then set the basin down. "I think you frightened them, or at least made them think twice." "Good," Jonas said. "That was the intention." Mei-Lin studied him in the dim light, and Jonas found himself acutely aware of how he must look to her. A rough mountain man with clothes that had seen better days and manners that were probably too blunt for polite society. But if she was put off by his appearance, she gave no sign of it. "Would you like to come in for tea?" she asked. "It is not much, but I can offer you that at least, to thank you for your help today." Jonas knew he should decline. It would not do her reputation any good to have a man visiting her cabin after dark, even for innocent reasons. But he found himself nodding acceptance before he could think better of it. "Why, I would like that," he said. "Thank you." The interior of the cabin was as tidy as the exterior, with everything in its place despite the limited space. A small stove provided heat and cooking space, a narrow bed stood against one wall, and a table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Mei-Lin had made the place as homey as possible with simple touches, embroidered cloth on the table, dried flowers in a jar, and a few pieces of delicate artwork on the walls that looked Chinese in style. Mei-Lin put a kettle on the stove and prepared a teapot with leaves from a small tin. The aroma that rose when she poured the hot water was unlike anything Jonas had smelled before, earthy and slightly sweet. "This is green tea," Mei-Lin explained, "from my homeland. I brought some with me when I came to America, and I have been very careful with it. It is almost gone now." She poured tea into 2 small cups without handles and offered one to Jonas. He accepted it carefully, mimicking the way she held her own cup. The tea was hot and had a delicate flavor that he found surprisingly pleasant. "It is good," he said honestly. "Different from the coffee I usually drink, but good." Mei-Lin smiled. "I like coffee too when I can get it, but tea reminds me of home, of my mother and sisters." "Do they know about the baby?" Jonas asked, then immediately worried he had been too forward. But Mei-Lin did not seem offended. "They know," she said softly. "I wrote to them when I learned I was pregnant. But letters take so long, and I do not know if mine reached them. The village where they live is very small, very far from the port cities." She paused, touching her belly again. "I think they would be happy, even though my husband is gone. In our culture, children are a blessing. Always." Jonas sipped his tea and found himself wanting to know more about this woman and her life. "How did you end up in Montana?" he asked. "It is a long way from China." Mei-Lin's expression grew distant, and Jonas could see her organizing her thoughts. "My husband, Chen Wei, he came to America to work on the railroad. He wanted to make money, to send it home to help his family. I was already his wife, and I could not bear to be separated from him, so I came too, even though it was very difficult, very dangerous." She spoke of the journey across the Pacific Ocean, cramped in the hold of a ship with dozens of other Chinese emigrants. She described the weeks at sea, the sickness, the fear, and then arrival in San Francisco, only to be herded onto trains that took them east and north to where the railroad was being built through the mountains. "Wei worked on the line for 3 years, Mei-Lin continued. "I worked too, cooking for the crews and doing laundry. We saved what money we could. We had dreams of opening a small business, maybe a restaurant or a laundry service in one of the growing towns. And then the rock slide happened." Her voice caught, and she paused to collect herself. "After Wei died, I could have returned to China, but I had nothing left there either. My family was very poor. They could not afford another mouth to feed. So I stayed here. I thought maybe I could make the life Wei and I had dreamed of, even without him." Jonas felt a surge of respect for this woman. She had crossed an ocean, survived conditions that would have broken many people, and now she was facing pregnancy and motherhood alone in a hostile land. Yet she spoke without self-pity, simply stating facts. "That takes a lot of courage," Jonas said quietly. "More than most people have." Mei-Lin met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that did not need words. They were both survivors, both people who had chosen hard lives and bore the consequences without complaint. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Jonas would have expected. Mei-Lin asked about his life in the mountains, and Jonas found himself describing his cabin, his trap lines, and the rhythms of his solitary existence. He told her about the changing seasons, the wildlife, and the challenges of living in such remote country. In turn, she spoke more about her childhood in China, her family, and the cultural traditions she struggled to maintain so far from home. Finally, Jonas noticed how late it had grown and rose to leave. "I should go. You need your rest, and I have taken up enough of your evening." Mei-Lin walked him to the door. "Thank you for visiting, Jonas. It has been nice to talk with someone. Most people in town, they do not want to speak with me." "Not really." Jonas paused in the doorway, suddenly reluctant to leave. "I will be in town for another day or two. May I come by again, just to make sure everything is all right?" "I would like that," Mei-Lin said, and her smile was warmer this time, reaching her eyes. Jonas walked back to the boarding house through the quiet streets, his mind churning with unfamiliar thoughts. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person. Mei-Lin was unlike any woman he had ever met, with her quiet strength and dignity. And she was beautiful, though he had been trying not to dwell on that fact. Beautiful and pregnant and grieving a husband who had been dead for 2 years. Jonas reminded himself sternly that she was vulnerable and in need of protection, nothing more. He was simply doing what any decent man would do, helping someone in trouble. But as he lay in his narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, Jonas could not quite convince himself that was the whole truth. Something had shifted inside him during that hour in Mei-Lin's cabin, something he had thought was long dead. He found himself thinking about her smile, the sound of her voice, the grace with which she moved despite her pregnancy. And he found himself wanting to protect her, not just from the men who harassed her, but from everything harsh and cruel in the world. It was a dangerous thought for a man who had built his life around solitude and self-reliance, but Jonas could not seem to shake it. The next morning, Jonas went about his business in town with half his mind on his tasks and the other half on Mei-Lin. He collected his supplies from the general store, arranged for grain to be delivered to the livery for his horses, and stopped by the blacksmith to have a loose shoe reset. But all the while, he was listening to the conversations around him, picking up on the undercurrent of hostility toward the Chinese residents. Silver Creek had a small Chinese community, perhaps 30 or 40 people, most of them former railroad workers who had stayed after the line was completed. They lived in a cluster of small cabins on the edge of town and kept mostly to themselves, working as laundrymen, cooks, and laborers. The white residents tolerated their presence because they did work that others did not want to do, but tolerance was not the same as acceptance. Jonas heard plenty of derogatory comments and jokes throughout the morning, the kind of casual racism that seemed to permeate every corner of frontier society. It made him angry, but he kept his reactions under control. Getting into fights would not help Mei-Lin or anyone else. What she needed was not a brawler, but someone with enough presence to deter the worst offenders without resorting to violence. Around midday, Jonas was walking past the saloon when he heard raised voices from inside. He paused, then recognized one of the voices as belonging to Ned, the crooked-nosed man from yesterday. Curiosity and concern made him push through the swinging doors into the dim interior. The saloon was moderately crowded for the lunch hour, with miners and cowboys drinking beer and eating simple meals. Ned and his 3 companions were at a corner table, well into their cups despite the early hour. They were talking loudly, and Jonas caught enough of the conversation to know they were still dwelling on yesterday's confrontation. "Think he is some kind of hero," Ned was saying, his words slurred. "Protecting that Chinese whore like she is something special. Probably been visiting her at night, getting what the railroad coolie used to get. That baby ain't even Chinese, I bet. Probably half white already." His companions laughed, and one of them added, "Maybe the mountain man wants to add another little half-breed to the collection. I hear those Chinese women are different, you know, built different down there." More laughter, crude and ugly. Jonas felt his hands curl into fists, but he forced himself to remain still. Starting a brawl in the saloon would accomplish nothing except to confirm their belief that violence was the answer to everything. But one of the other patrons, an older cowboy Jonas did not recognize, apparently disagreed with his assessment. The man stood up from his table and walked over to Ned's group, his weathered face hard with disapproval. "You boys ought to watch your mouths," the cowboy said. "There are decent folk in here trying to enjoy their lunch without listening to your filth." Ned looked up, his eyes bloodshot and mean. "And who the hell are you to tell us what to say?" "Name's Tom Garrett," the cowboy replied. "And I've been around long enough to know that men who talk that way about women are usually cowards at heart, the kind who only feel big when they are tearing someone else down." For a moment, Jonas thought Ned might actually take a swing at the older man. But then Ned seemed to remember the audience and settled back in his chair with a dismissive wave. "Whatever you say, old man, we're just having a bit of fun. No harm in that." Tom Garrett held his gaze for another moment, then nodded slowly. "See that it stays that way." He turned and walked out of the saloon, passing Jonas with a slight nod of acknowledgement. Jonas followed him out into the street. "That was well done," he said. "Thank you for speaking up." Tom shrugged. Could not listen to it anymore. "I've known some Chinese folks in my time, good, honest people. Worked with a few on a cattle drive once. They pulled their weight same as anyone." He studied Jonas with shrewd eyes. "You are the mountain man they were talking about, I reckon. The one who stood up for the washerwoman yesterday." "I am," Jonas confirmed. "Jonas Mackenzie." "Tom Garrett, like I said in there." They shook hands, and Jonas noted the older man's grip was still strong despite his years. "I have seen you around town before, trading furs and such. You have a good reputation among the folks who know you. Fair dealer, keeps his word." "I try," Jonas said. "Listen, I am worried about Mei-Lin. That is the washerwoman's name. Those men have it in for her, and I cannot stay in town indefinitely to keep an eye on things. Do you know anyone here who might be willing to watch out for her? Make sure she's not harassed?" Tom considered the question. "There are some decent folks in Silver Creek, but most of them keep their heads down. Do not want to make trouble for themselves by defending a Chinese woman." He paused, then added, "The sheriff is an honest man, though. Ben Hollis. He does not tolerate violence or threats against anyone in his town, white or Chinese. You might want to talk to him, let him know what is going on." Jonas nodded slowly. It was good advice. He should have thought of it himself. "Where can I find him?" "Office is just down the street past the bank. He's usually there this time of day, unless there's trouble somewhere." Jonas thanked Tom and headed for the sheriff's office. He found it easily. A small wooden building with bars on the single window and a faded sign identifying it as the seat of law enforcement for Silver Creek. The door was open, and Jonas could see a man sitting at a desk inside, working through a stack of papers. Sheriff Ben Hollis looked up when Jonas knocked on the doorframe. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression that suggested he had seen plenty in his years wearing the badge. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he took in Jonas's appearance. "Help you?" Hollis asked. Jonas stepped inside and introduced himself, then explained the situation with Mei-Lin and the men who had been harassing her. Hollis listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer as the story unfolded. "I know Ned Calloway and his crew," Hollis said when Jonas finished. "They have been trouble since they arrived in town 3 months ago. I've locked them up twice for drunk and disorderly, and I suspect they are behind some of the thefts we have been having. But I have not been able to prove anything." He leaned back in his chair, studying Jonas. "The Chinese community here has faced some harassment before, but nobody has reported anything specific. They tend to keep to themselves and handle problems internally." "Mei-Lin is alone," Jonas said, "and pregnant. She does not have the resources to handle men like Calloway on her own." "No, she does not," Hollis agreed. He stood and buckled on his gun belt, which had been hanging on a peg by the door. "Tell you what, I will make a point of patrolling past her place more often, and I will have a word with Calloway and his friends, make it clear that harassment of any kind will not be tolerated in my town. That should discourage them from causing any more trouble." Jonas felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "I appreciate that, Sheriff. I will be heading back to the mountains soon, and I would rest easier knowing someone is keeping an eye on things." Hollis nodded. "Consider it done. And Mr. Mackenzie, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Too many people see trouble and look the other way. It takes a good man to stand up for someone who cannot defend themselves." Jonas shook the sheriff's hand and left the office feeling better about the situation. With Hollis watching over things, Mei-Lin would have some protection even after Jonas returned to his cabin in the mountains. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than nothing. He spent the rest of the afternoon finishing his errands, then made his way to Mei-Lin's cabin as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. She was hanging laundry again, moving slowly but efficiently despite her advanced pregnancy. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up with a genuine smile that made something warm unfold in Jonas's chest. "Jonas," she said, "I did not think I would see you again today." "I wanted to check in," Jonas replied, "and to let you know that I spoke with Sheriff Hollis. He's going to keep an eye on things and make sure Calloway and his friends leave you alone." Mei-Lin's eyes widened slightly. "You went to the sheriff? For me?" "Of course," Jonas said. "You deserve to be safe in this town, same as anyone else. Hollis is a good man. He will make sure you are protected." Mei-Lin set down her laundry basket and looked at Jonas with an expression he could not quite read. "You are a good man too, Jonas Mackenzie. Not many would go to such trouble for someone they do not know, someone like me. Someone like you, Jonas repeated. You mean someone who works hard, minds their own business, and deserves to be treated with respect? Yes, I suppose I would go to trouble for someone like that. A flush of color touched Mei-Lin's cheeks, and she looked down at her hands. You make it sound simple, but you know it is not. You know why those men feel they can treat me the way they do. I know, Jonas said quietly, and I know it is not right. Never has been, never will be. The color of your skin or the shape of your eyes does not make you any less deserving of dignity and safety. Mei-Lin raised her eyes to his again, and Jonas could see tears glistening there. Thank you, she whispered. You do not know what it means to hear someone say that, to be seen as a person, not just a Chinese woman. Jonas took a step closer, moved by an impulse he did not fully understand. You are a person, Mei-Lin, a remarkable person, and I am honored to know you. They stood there for a moment, the evening air cooling around them and the distant sounds of the town fading into background noise. Jonas felt something shifting between them, something that went beyond simple kindness or protection. It was connection, genuine and deep, and it scared him even as it drew him in. Finally, Mei-Lin broke the silence. Will you stay for dinner? I know it is forward of me to ask, but I have made too much food and I would enjoy the company. Jonas knew he should decline again. People would talk if they saw him visiting her cabin too often, but he found himself accepting anyway, because the thought of spending another evening in her company was too appealing to resist. I would like that very much, he said. Dinner was simple but delicious. Rice with vegetables and a small portion of chicken cooked with spices Jonas did not recognize. Mei-Lin explained that she had learned to adapt Chinese cooking methods to the ingredients available in Montana, creating a hybrid cuisine that honored her heritage while working with what she could obtain. They talked while they ate, the conversation ranging from practical matters to deeper topics. Jonas told her about his reasons for leaving civilization behind and making a life in the mountains, the need for space and solitude after too many years of feeling constrained by society's expectations. Mei-Lin spoke of her own feelings of displacement, caught between two worlds and fully belonging to neither. Sometimes I think I will never truly belong anywhere, she said softly. In China, I am the woman who went to America and lost her husband. Here, I am the Chinese washerwoman who people wish would go back where she came from. My baby will be the same, neither fully Chinese nor fully American. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Jonas suggested. Maybe belonging is less about where you come from and more about finding people who accept you as you are. Mei-Lin considered this. Is that what you have found in the mountains? Acceptance? I have found peace, Jonas replied, and freedom to be myself without worrying about what others think. It is not the same as belonging, maybe, but it is enough for me. Are you lonely? The question was direct, and Jonas appreciated her honesty. Sometimes, he admitted, especially during the long winters when I do not see another soul for months. But I have always thought loneliness was preferable to the alternative being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. Mei-Lin nodded slowly. I understand that. I feel alone often, even in a town full of people. But tonight, sitting here with you, I do not feel alone. I feel seen, understood. I feel the same way, Jonas said, and realized it was true. This connection with Mei-Lin was something he had not experienced in years, perhaps ever. With her, he could be himself without pretense or explanation. She did not judge him for his rough edges or his unconventional life, and he saw her for who she truly was, a strong, intelligent woman making the best of difficult circumstances. After dinner, they sat by the stove and talked until late in the evening. Jonas finally forced himself to leave when he noticed Mei-Lin struggling to keep her eyes open. At the door, he paused and turned back to her. I'm heading back to my cabin tomorrow, he said, but I will be back in town in the spring when the snow melts. Will you be all right until then? Mei-Lin touched her belly, which would be holding a baby long before spring arrived. I will manage. I always do. But I will think of you, Jonas, and I will be glad when you return. Jonas wanted to say more, wanted to promise he would somehow look after her even from the mountains, but he knew the limits of what he could offer. So he simply nodded and said, "Take care of yourself, Mei-Lin. You and the baby." He walked back through the dark streets to the boarding house, already feeling the pull of the mountains, but also a new and unexpected reluctance to leave Silver Creek behind. For the first time in a decade, he found himself questioning his solitary existence and wondering if there might be room in his life for something more. Jonas left Silver Creek the next morning as planned, but his thoughts remained tangled with images of Mei-Lin's face and the sound of her voice. The journey back to his cabin took 2 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. As he climbed higher into the mountains, the aspens were showing their autumn gold, and the air carried the crisp promise of winter. His cabin stood in a sheltered valley at the edge of a meadow, backed by towering pines and fronted by a clear stream that ran year-round. Jonas had built it himself over the course of several months, using logs cut from the surrounding forest and chinked with mud and moss. It was not large, just a single room with a sleeping loft, but it was solid and weatherproof, and it had been home for the last 10 years. But as Jonas unloaded his supplies and settled back into his familiar routines, the cabin felt different somehow. Emptier. The silence that had once been companionable now seemed oppressive. He found his thoughts drifting back to Mei-Lin constantly, wondering how she was doing, whether the baby had been born yet, whether Calloway and his friends were leaving her alone. The weeks passed as Jonas prepared for winter. He checked and reset his trap lines, gathering the beaver and muskrat pelts that were his livelihood. He hunted elk and deer, smoking and preserving the meat to see him through the cold months. He chopped wood until he had a massive pile stacked against the side of the cabin. And through it all, he thought about Mei-Lin. The first snow fell in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon. But Jonas knew the heavy snows would follow soon, locking him into the high country until spring. The thought filled him with an unfamiliar restlessness. In previous years, he had welcomed the enforced solitude of winter, using the time to rest and reflect. This year, it felt like a prison sentence. In early November, with a brief break in the weather, Jonas made a decision that surprised even himself. He saddled his horse and packed light supplies, then headed back down the mountain toward Silver Creek. It was risky. A storm could blow in and trap him on the trail. But the need to see Mei-Lin, to know she was safe, overrode his usual caution. The journey took longer than expected, because Jonas had to navigate around early snowdrifts in the higher passes. But 3 days after leaving his cabin, he rode into Silver Creek under a gray sky that threatened more snow. The town looked much as it had in September, though the mining activity had slowed with the onset of cold weather. Jonas stabled his horse at the livery and walked directly to Mei-Lin's cabin, his heart beating faster than the exertion warranted. He found her sitting outside despite the cold, mending a shirt in the weak afternoon light. But it was not just Mei-Lin. Wrapped in a thick blanket against her chest was a tiny baby, barely visible except for a tuft of black hair and a small round face. Mei-Lin looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her face transformed with surprise and joy. "Jonas, I did not expect to see you until spring. What are you doing here?" Jonas stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of himself. "I wanted to check on you, to make sure everything was all right." "Come, sit," Mei-Lin said, gesturing to a second chair she had placed outside. "Meet my son. He was born 3 weeks ago. His name is Chen Liang, but I think of him as my little light, because that is what Liang means. Light." Jonas sat carefully, his eyes fixed on the baby. Chen Liang was tiny, his features delicate and perfect. As Jonas watched, the baby opened his eyes dark like his mother's and seemed to study Jonas with surprising focus for one so young. "He is beautiful," Jonas said, and meant it. "How was the birth? Were you all right?" "It was difficult," Mei-Lin admitted. "But there is a Chinese midwife in town, Mrs. Wang. She helped me and everything went well. Chen Liang is healthy and growing strong." Jonas felt relief wash over him. He had worried about this, about Mei-Lin facing childbirth alone without proper help. But she had managed, as she always seemed to manage. "I am glad," he said simply. and I am glad you have support here." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the baby sleep. Then Mei-Lin spoke again, her voice soft. "I thought about you often after you left. I wondered if I had imagined our connection, or if it was real. But now you are here, and I know it was real. You came back." Jonas met her eyes, and the truth tumbled out before he could stop it. "I could not stay away. I tried, Mei-Lin. I told myself you were just someone I helped, that it was simple Christian charity and nothing more. But I could not stop thinking about you, about your strength and your courage, and the way you make me feel like I am more than just a mountain man living alone. So I came back, even though I know it is foolish and dangerous with winter coming." Mei-Lin's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "It is not foolish, Jonas. It is wonderful. Because I have thought the same things. I know I should not feel this way so soon after Chen Liang's birth, and with my husband only 2 years gone. But my heart does not care about should or should not. It only knows what it feels." Jonas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Mei-Lin extended her free hand and let him take it, their fingers intertwining. Her hand was small and work-roughened, but warm, and holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I do not know what to do with this," Jonas confessed. "I have spent so long being alone that I have forgotten how to be with someone. And your life is here, with Chen Liang, building a future. I have nothing to offer you except a cabin in the mountains and a hard life away from everything." "You offer yourself," Mei-Lin said, "your kindness and strength and protection. That is not nothing, Jonas. That is everything." They talked as the afternoon faded into evening, working through the complicated reality of their situation. Jonas could not stay in Silver Creek indefinitely. He had trap lines to run and a living to make. But he could not ask Mei-Lin to leave the relative safety of town and come to his isolated cabin, especially with a newborn baby. The solution, when they finally arrived at it, was imperfect but workable. Jonas would stay in town for a week, helping Mei-Lin with whatever she needed and getting to know Chen Liang. Then he would return to his cabin for the winter, but would come back down in early spring, as soon as the passes were clear. If things went well, if their feelings remained strong, they would talk about a future together. Maybe Mei-Lin and Chen Liang could come to the mountains with him for the summer months, returning to town before the winter snows. Or maybe Jonas could build a larger cabin closer to Silver Creek, somewhere that would give them the space they needed while keeping them within reach of the town's resources. It was a plan that required patience and faith, but both of them had those qualities in abundance. Jonas spent that week in Silver Creek, and it was one of the best weeks of his life. He helped Mei-Lin with her washing work, carrying heavy baskets and hanging laundry when her energy flagged. He chopped wood for her stove and repaired a leak in her roof. And he spent long hours simply sitting with her, talking about everything and nothing while Chen Liang slept or nursed. He also made his presence known around town, making sure Ned Calloway and his friends understood that Mei-Lin was under his protection. There were no direct confrontations, but Jonas made a point of being visible whenever Calloway was around, a silent reminder that any harassment would have consequences. Sheriff Hollis noticed Jonas's extended stay and stopped by Mei-Lin's cabin one afternoon to check in. Jonas tensed, worried the sheriff might have concerns about his relationship with Mei-Lin, but Hollis surprised him. "I am glad you are here," the sheriff said. "Miss Chen has had no trouble since you left in September, but it does not hurt to reinforce the message that she is not to be bothered. And I will be honest, Mackenzie, this town could use more men like you, men with character and a sense of decency." "I appreciate that, Sheriff," Jonas said, "but I'm not a town man. The mountains are where I belong." Hollis nodded. "I understand that, but it is clear you care about Miss Chen and her boy. That counts for something." When Jonas finally prepared to leave Silver Creek and return to his cabin, both he and Mei-Lin knew the parting would be difficult. He stood in her small cabin, holding Chen Liang while Mei-Lin packed some food for his journey. The baby was warm and solid in his arms, and Jonas felt a surge of protectiveness that nearly overwhelmed him. "I will come back as soon as I can," Jonas promised. "Early spring before the town fully wakes up. And Mei-Lin, I want you to know that I am committed to this, to you and Chen Liang. I know we are taking a risk, building something together when the world will not approve. But I believe it is worth it." Mei-Lin came to stand beside him, looking down at her sleeping son. "I believe it too. And I will wait for you, Jonas, no matter how long the winter lasts." They shared their first kiss then, gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. Then Jonas reluctantly handed Chen Liang back to his mother, gathered his supplies, and headed out into the cold. The winter that followed was the longest Jonas had ever experienced. The snow fell heavily, piling up until his cabin was nearly buried, and travel became impossible. He ran his trap lines when he could, staying busy to keep from dwelling on how much he missed Mei-Lin and Chen Liang. In the evenings, he sat by his fire and tried to imagine what they were doing, whether Chen Liang was growing and thriving, whether Mei-Lin was staying warm and safe. He also did a lot of thinking about the future. Jonas had been honest when he said he did not know how to be with someone after so many years alone. But he wanted to learn. He wanted to build a life that included Mei-Lin and her son, a life that honored both his need for the mountains and her need for community and stability. By the time the snow began to melt in March, Jonas had made several decisions. He would build a new cabin, larger and more comfortable than his current one, but located at a lower elevation where winter travel was more feasible. He would continue trapping, but would also explore other ways to make money, perhaps offering guide services to hunters or prospectors who needed someone with knowledge of the mountains. And he would marry Mei-Lin, if she would have him, giving Chen Liang a father and giving himself the family he had never known he wanted. The moment the high passes became passable, Jonas loaded his winter's worth of pelts onto a pack horse and headed down to Silver Creek. It was late April, and the mountains were alive with spring. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the streams ran high with snowmelt. Jonas's heart was lighter than it had been in months. He arrived in Silver Creek on a bright afternoon to find the town bustling with renewed activity. Miners who had holed up for the winter were returning to their claims, and merchants were restocking their inventories. Jonas barely noticed any of it. He went straight to Mei-Lin's cabin, his nerves jangling with anticipation. She was outside hanging laundry, just as she had been the first day he saw her. But this time, Chen Liang was in a basket at her feet, awake and alert. The baby had grown significantly, his face rounder and more animated. When Mei-Lin saw Jonas approaching, she dropped the sheet she had been hanging and ran to him, heedless of propriety or watching eyes. Jonas caught her in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with pure joy. Then he set her down gently and kissed her, not caring who saw. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so hard their faces hurt. "You came back," Mei-Lin said, touching his face as if to make sure he was real. "I promised I would," Jonas replied, "and I always keep my promises." Over the next few days, Jonas shared his plans with Mei-Lin. He showed her sketches of the new cabin he wanted to build, explained his ideas for making their life together work. Mei-Lin listened carefully, asking questions and offering suggestions. The more they talked, the more excited they both became about the possibilities. But there were practical concerns too. Mei-Lin worried about leaving the small Chinese community in Silver Creek, the only people who truly understood her culture and language. Jonas worried about the isolation his life would impose on her and Chen Liang, especially if they spent extended periods in the mountains. They worked through these concerns together, compromising and adjusting until they had a plan that felt workable. They would marry as soon as possible, giving their relationship legitimacy in the eyes of the law and society. Jonas would build the new cabin over the summer while Mei-Lin continued her washing business in town. In the fall, before the heavy snows came, Mei-Lin and Chen Liang would move to the new cabin with Jonas. They would spend the winter there together, a family. And if it proved too difficult or isolating for Mei-Lin, they would adjust the plan, perhaps maintaining 2 residences and splitting their time. The wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony performed by the town's Methodist minister. Jonas had been worried that the minister might refuse to marry them, given the prejudices of the time. But Reverend Samuel Adams turned out to be a man of genuine Christian charity who believed that love and commitment were what mattered, not the color of one's skin. The ceremony was attended by a small group. Sheriff Hollis and his wife, Tom Garrett, the cowboy who had stood up for Mei-Lin in the saloon, Mrs. Wong, the midwife, and a handful of other Chinese community members who had become Mei-Lin's friends. It was not a large gathering, but everyone present was genuinely happy for the couple. Mei-Lin wore a simple blue dress, the same one Jonas had first seen her in, though she had embroidered it with delicate white flowers. Jonas had bought a new shirt and vest for the occasion and had trimmed his beard. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived, Jonas felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was what he was meant to do, who he was meant to be with. After the ceremony, Mrs. Wong hosted a small reception at her larger cabin, serving traditional Chinese foods alongside American fare. Jonas tried everything, wanting to honor Mei-Lin's heritage, and found that he enjoyed most of it. Chen Liang, now 6 months old and sitting up on his own, was passed around among the guests and thoroughly spoiled with attention. Late in the evening, Jonas and Mei-Lin walked back to her cabin, their cabin now under a sky full of stars. Chen Liang was asleep against Mei-Lin's shoulder, exhausted from all the excitement. Jonas carried their wedding gifts, a modest collection of household items and well-wishes. "Are you happy?" Jonas asked as they reached the cabin door. Mei-Lin turned to look at him, her face glowing in the moonlight. "I am happier than I ever thought possible. When Wei died, I thought my chance for love and family had died with him. But you have given me a new chance, Jonas. A new life. I will spend the rest of my days being grateful for you." Jonas pulled her close, careful not to squish the sleeping baby between them. "I am the grateful one. You have taught me that solitude is not the same as peace, and that opening my heart to others does not make me weak. You have made me better, Mei-Lin." They went inside together, beginning their new life as a family. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Jonas divided his time between trapping and building the new cabin. The site he had chosen was perfect, a sheltered valley at a moderate elevation, with good water, timber for fuel, and a meadow where they could eventually plant a garden and perhaps keep a few animals. It was only a half-day's ride from Silver Creek, close enough to stay connected, but far enough to maintain the privacy and space Jonas valued. Mei-Lin continued her washing business, but Jonas insisted on helping whenever he was in town. He would carry the heavy wet laundry, chop wood for her stove, and play with Chen Liang while Mei-Lin worked. The townspeople gradually grew accustomed to seeing them together, and while there were still those who disapproved of the match, most people came to accept it. Jonas's reputation as an honest man and Mei-Lin's quiet dignity won over even some of the more skeptical residents. Ned Calloway and his friends kept their distance, though Jonas sometimes caught them watching with hostile eyes. Sheriff Hollis had apparently made good on his promise to discourage harassment, and the men seemed unwilling to risk the consequences of causing trouble. Still, Jonas remained vigilant, never letting his guard down completely. By September, the new cabin was finished. It was larger than Jonas's old place, with a main room that included space for cooking and living, a separate bedroom for him and Mei-Lin, and a loft where Chen Liang could sleep as he grew older. Jonas had built a sturdy stove from river rock and installed glass windows that let in light while keeping out the cold. There was a covered porch and a small barn for animals. It was the finest thing Jonas had ever built, and he was proud of it. Moving day was both exciting and bittersweet. Mei-Lin packed up her few possessions from the cabin in Silver Creek, wrapping her treasures carefully: the embroidered cloth from her mother, the tin of tea that was now nearly empty, and the small pieces of Chinese artwork that reminded her of home. Mrs. Wong and some of the other Chinese women came to say goodbye, promising to visit in the spring. There were tears and hugs and wishes for good fortune. Jonas loaded everything onto a wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. Chen Liang, now crawling and getting into everything, was secured in a basket to keep him safe during the journey. And then they set off, leaving Silver Creek behind and heading into the mountains that would be their new home. The cabin exceeded Mei-Lin's expectations. She walked through each room, touching the smooth logs Jonas had so carefully fitted together, admiring the craftsmanship. When she saw the bedroom with its wide bed and the carved chest Jonas had built for her belongings, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful, Jonas, more than I ever dreamed of having." You deserve beautiful things, Jonas said. You and Chen Liang both. I want to give you everything I can. They settled into their new life with surprising ease. Jonas taught Mei-Lin how to fish in the stream and identify edible plants in the forest. Mei-Lin taught Jonas more Chinese phrases and cooking techniques. Together, they established routines, mornings spent on necessary chores, afternoons on larger projects or leisure activities, evenings around the fire with Chen Liang playing on a blanket between them. Chen Liang thrived in the mountain environment, growing stronger and more alert every day. He learned to pull himself up on furniture and took his first wobbly steps while holding Jonas's hands. Jonas, who had never spent much time around babies, discovered a patience and gentleness he had not known he possessed. He carved toys for Chen Liang and told him stories and sang off key lullabies that made Mei-Lin laugh. As winter closed in, sealing them away from the outside world, Jonas discovered something remarkable. He was not lonely at all. The cabin that would have felt too small and confining with the wrong people felt perfect with Mei-Lin and Chen Liang. The long, dark evenings were filled with conversation, laughter, and the simple contentment of being together. They made love for the first time on a snowy night in December, after Chen Liang had fallen asleep in his loft. Mei-Lin had been hesitant, worried about comparisons to her first husband, or about whether enough time had passed since Chen Liang's birth. But Jonas took his time, gentle and patient, letting her set the pace. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two people who had been lonely far too long finally finding completion in each other. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Mei-Lin tucked against his side, Jonas whispered the words he had been holding inside for months. "I love you, Mei-Lin. I know I should have said it sooner, but I wanted to be sure you were ready to hear it. I love you with everything I am." Mei-Lin raised her head to look at him, her eyes shining in the dim light from the banked fire. "I love you too, Jonas. I have loved you since the day you stood up for me against those men. You are the best man I have ever known, and I thank whatever fate brought you into my life." The winter passed peacefully, a cocoon of warmth and love in the midst of the frozen wilderness. Jonas ran his trap lines and hunted for meat, while Mei-Lin kept the cabin warm and prepared their meals. Chen Liang continued to grow and develop, saying his first words and charming both his parents with his personality. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted and the meadow turned green, and wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Jonas and Mei-Lin planted a garden, working side by side to turn the soil and sow seeds. They talked about the future, making plans for the coming year and the years beyond that. In May, they made their first trip back to Silver Creek since moving to the mountains. The town welcomed them warmly, and Jonas noticed that the attitudes toward them had softened even further. Mei-Lin visited with Mrs. Wang and the other Chinese women, sharing news and catching up on all that had happened during the winter. Jonas traded his furs and stocked up on supplies, pleased to see that his isolation had not damaged his business relationships. That evening, they had dinner at the home of Sheriff Hollis and his wife Martha. It was a pleasant meal, and afterward, the adults sat on the porch while Chen Liang played with a wooden horse Jonas had carved for him. "You two seem happy," Martha Hollis observed, smiling at the way Jonas and Mei-Lin sat close together, hands intertwined. "Really, genuinely happy." "We are," Mei-Lin confirmed. "The cabin is wonderful and the mountains are peaceful. It is a good life." "I am glad," Sheriff Hollis said. "And I will tell you both honestly, you have changed some minds in this town. Folks who were skeptical about your marriage have seen how you treat each other, how you have built a real family. It has made them think differently about some of their prejudices." Jonas squeezed Mei-Lin's hand. "That is good to hear. We did not set out to change minds, but if our happiness can help others see past their ignorance, I am all for it." They stayed in Silver Creek for 3 days, long enough to handle their business and visit with friends, but not so long that Jonas started feeling confined by the town. On the morning they prepared to leave, Tom Garrett stopped by to say goodbye. "You take care of that family of yours," Tom said, shaking Jonas's hand. "And if you ever need anything, you send word. There are good people here who would help you." "I appreciate that, Tom," Jonas replied, "and the same goes for you. My door's always open." The journey back to their cabin felt like coming home in the truest sense. As they climbed into the mountains, following the familiar trail, Jonas felt his spirit lift. He loved Silver Creek and the friends they had there, but the mountains were where he belonged. And now, thanks to Mei-Lin and Chen Liang, belonging had a depth and richness it had never had before. Summer unfolded in lazy golden days. The garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables to supplement the meat Jonas hunted and the fish they caught from the stream. Chen Liang celebrated his first birthday with a small cake Mei-Lin baked in the Dutch oven and presents carved by Jonas. He was walking confidently now and starting to put together simple sentences in a mix of English and Chinese. In August, Mei-Lin told Jonas that she was pregnant again. The news filled him with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of expanding their family, concern about Mei-Lin going through another difficult birth so far from help, and wonder at the thought of a child who would be truly his from the beginning. "Are you happy about this?" Mei-Lin asked, watching his face carefully. "I am," Jonas assured her. "I'm thrilled. I just want to make sure you have everything you need. Maybe we should plan to be in Silver Creek when your time comes so Mrs. Wong can help again." Mei-Lin nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea. The baby should come in late March or early April. We can go down to town in February before the last of the winter snows." They spent the rest of the summer and fall preparing. Jonas built a proper cradle for the new baby and stocked up on extra supplies. Mei-Lin sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill. And Chen Liang, oblivious to the changes coming, continued to explore his world with boundless curiosity. Winter came again, their second together. It was harder than the first in some ways because Mei-Lin's pregnancy made her tired and uncomfortable. But it was also sweeter because they had the knowledge of having survived the first winter and thrived. They were no longer figuring each other out. They knew each other's rhythms and preferences, could anticipate needs before they were spoken. In February, as planned, they made the journey to Silver Creek. The trip was harder than usual because of Mei-Lin's condition, and they had to stop frequently to let her rest. But they arrived safely and took up temporary residence in Mei-Lin's old cabin, which had remained empty through her absence. The town rallied around them in a way that surprised and moved Jonas. Women brought food and offered advice. Men helped Jonas with the heavy work of setting up the cabin again. And Mrs. Wong checked on Mei-Lin daily, monitoring the baby's position and Mei-Lin's health with experienced hands. In late March, Mei-Lin went into labor. It was a long and difficult process, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jonas paced outside the cabin while Mrs. Wong and Martha Hollis attended to Mei-Lin inside. He could hear her cries of pain and felt helpless, wishing there was something he could do beyond waiting. Finally, in the early afternoon, a new sound joined the others: the thin wail of a newborn baby. Jonas rushed to the door as Mrs. Wong emerged, smiling despite her obvious exhaustion. "You have a daughter," Mrs. Wong announced. "A healthy, strong daughter, and Mei-Lin did very well. She is tired, but fine." Jonas went inside to find Mei-Lin propped up in bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked exhausted, but radiant, her face glowing with the same joy Jonas had seen when Chen Liang was born. "Come meet your daughter," Mei-Lin said softly. Jonas approached carefully, overwhelmed by the sight of the baby. She was smaller than Chen Liang had been, with delicate features that seemed to blend Mei-Lin's Chinese heritage with something of Jonas's own stronger lines. A tuft of dark hair crowned her head, and when she opened her eyes, they were the deep blue gray of a newborn that Jonas had heard often changed to brown. "What should we name her?" Jonas asked, gently touching one tiny fist. Mei-Lin smiled. "I was thinking lily. It is a flower that grows in both China and America, beautiful in both places. Lily Mackenzie." "Lily," Jonas repeated, testing the name. "I love it. It is perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully took his daughter into his arms. Lily looked up at him with those unfocused newborn eyes, and Jonas felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This was his daughter, his blood, a piece of himself and Mei-Lin combined into something entirely new. The responsibility of it was staggering, but so was the joy. Chen Liang, who had been staying with Mrs. Wong during the birth, was brought over later that afternoon to meet his baby sister. At 18 months old, he was fascinated by the tiny creature, but also uncertain, clinging to Jonas's leg and watching Lily with wide eyes. It took patient encouragement from both parents before he would come close enough to gently touch her hand. "Baby," Chen Liang said clearly, one of his favorite new words. "My baby." "Yes," Mei-Lin confirmed, smiling. "Your baby sister, Lily. You are a big brother now, Liang. You will help us take care of her." They stayed in Silver Creek for 6 weeks, giving Mei-Lin time to recover and Lily time to grow a bit stronger before the journey back to the mountain cabin. During that time, Jonas was struck by how much his life had changed in less than 2 years. He had gone from a solitary mountain man to a husband and father of 2, with all the responsibilities and joys that entailed. It was both terrifying and wonderful. The return to the cabin in May was an adventure. They had to travel slowly because of Lily, stopping frequently to let Mei-Lin nurse and rest. Chen Liang, who had been easy to transport as a baby, was now a toddler who wanted to walk himself and investigate everything they passed. But they made it safely, and Jonas felt profound relief when their cabin came into view. Summer and fall passed in a blur of activity. Jonas worked harder than ever, hunting and trapping and making improvements to the cabin and outbuildings. Mei-Lin cared for Lily and Chen Liang while also maintaining the garden and preserving food for winter. It was exhausting work, but they did it together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the small victories. Lily grew from a tiny newborn into a fat, happy baby who smiled constantly and rarely cried. Chen Liang adjusted to his role as big brother, sometimes jealous of the attention Lily received, but mostly protective and loving. He would bring her his toys and sing to her in his mix of English and Chinese, and Lily would watch him with adoring eyes. As winter approached again, Jonas and Mei-Lin took stock of their life. They had a comfortable home, 2 healthy children, and enough supplies to see them through the cold months. More importantly, they had each other, and the love between them had only deepened with time. One evening, with snow falling softly outside and both children asleep, Jonas and Mei-Lin sat by the fire and talked about the future. Are you happy here?" Jonas asked, a question he had posed before but felt needed to be asked again. "Really happy? I know it is not easy, being so isolated, especially with the children." Mei-Lin was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "I will not lie and say there are not hard days, days when I miss the company of other women or when I worry about the children getting sick so far from a doctor. But those hard days are far outnumbered by good ones. And yes, Jonas, I am happy, happier than I have ever been. You have given me a life I love, a family I treasure. What more could I ask for?" Jonas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I feel the same way. Before I met you, I thought I had everything I needed. I was content in my solitude, but I did not know what I was missing. You have shown me that having people to love and care for does not make me weak or confined. It makes me stronger. It gives everything I do more meaning." "We have built something good together," Mei-Lin said, "something worth protecting and nurturing. Our children will grow up knowing they are loved and valued. They will see that love can cross boundaries of culture and race. That is a powerful thing, Jonas." "It is," Jonas agreed, "and I promise you, Mei-Lin, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and the children have everything you need. Not just material things, but love and security and the freedom to be exactly who you are." Mei-Lin turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining. "I know you will. I trust you completely, and I promise the same to you. We are partners in this life, equals in every way that matters. Whatever challenges come, we will face them together." They sealed the promise with a kiss, then sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind that Jonas had never imagined experiencing. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters when supplies ran low and everyone's patience wore thin. There were illnesses that terrified them, including a frightening week when Chen Liang developed a high fever that finally broke after Mei-Lin treated him with herbal remedies she had learned from Mrs. Wang. There were trips to Silver Creek that had to be delayed because of weather or other circumstances, leaving them more isolated than planned. But there were far more good times than bad. Chen Liang grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved exploring the mountains with his father. Jonas taught him to fish and track animals, to read the weather and navigate by the stars. Lily grew into a fearless little girl who could climb trees as well as her brother and who had her mother's intelligence and grace. Mei-Lin flourished in the mountain environment, finding a peace she had never known in Silver Creek. She maintained her connections to the Chinese community through regular trips to town, but the cabin in the mountains was truly home. She added her own touches over the years, a small shrine where she could honor her ancestors, a herb garden with both Western and Chinese medicinal plants, and embroidered decorations that brought color and beauty to every room. Jonas continued his work as a trapper and hunter, but he also branched out into guiding as he had planned. Several times a year, wealthy hunters from the east would hire him to take them into the mountains in search of elk or bear. The money was good, and it allowed Jonas to provide more luxuries for his family. He also built a relationship with a fur trader who made regular trips through the territory, which meant Jonas did not have to rely solely on the general store in Silver Creek. When Chen Liang was 5 and Lily was 3, Mei-Lin became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and the birth went smoothly. They had another son, whom they named Samuel, after Reverend Adams, who had married them. Sam, as they called him, was a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world rather than conquer it the way his older siblings had. The pattern of their lives was established. Winters in the mountain cabin, springs and falls split between the mountains and Silver Creek, and summers spent entirely at home with occasional visits from friends brave enough to make the journey. The children grew up bilingual, speaking English with their father and in town, and Chinese with their mother and the community in Silver Creek. They learned the skills they would need to thrive in both worlds, comfortable moving between cultures in a way that neither parent had ever been. Years passed. Chen Liang turned 10, then 12, then 15. Lily grew from a wild child into a thoughtful young woman. Sam developed a quiet intensity that reminded Jonas of himself at that age. And through it all, Jonas and Mei-Lin remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with every season that passed. There were still moments of prejudice and hatred from the outside world. Ned Calloway and his ilk never completely disappeared, though they grew older and less relevant as Silver Creek matured, and more progressive attitudes took hold. But Jonas and Mei-Lin had built something strong enough to withstand external pressure. Their family was a fortress of love and mutual respect, and nothing could breach its walls. On a spring evening when Jonas was 47 and Mei-Lin was 39, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Chen Liang was in town, apprenticing with the blacksmith and courting a young woman he had met there. Lily was inside helping Sam with his schoolwork, their voices drifting out through the open windows. "Can you believe it has been 15 years since we met?" Mei-Lin asked, leaning against Jonas's shoulder. Jonas wrapped his arm around her, marveling at how she still fit perfectly against his side. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like we have always been together." "I was thinking about that day," Mei-Lin continued, "when you stood up for me against those men. I was so frightened and so alone. I thought I would have to endure their cruelty forever, that there was no escape. And then you appeared, like something out of a story, my mountain man hero." Jonas chuckled. "I am no hero. I just could not stand by and watch them hurt you." "That is what makes you a hero," Mei-Lin insisted. "You saw wrong being done and you acted to stop it, even though it was not your fight, even though it would have been easier to look away." "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me," Jonas said quietly. "I know I have told you that before, but it is worth saying again. You saved me, Mei-Lin. I was slowly turning into stone up in these mountains, becoming harder and more isolated with every year. You reminded me how to be human, how to feel and connect and love. I owe you everything." Mei-Lin turned to look up at him, her eyes still as bright and intelligent as they had been that first day. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "I was drowning in loneliness and fear, and you threw me a lifeline. But you were adrift too, in your own way. We found each other when we both needed someone most. That is not heroism or rescue. That is just love, Jonas. Simple, complicated, beautiful love. Jonas kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that held 15 years of devotion and the promise of all the years to come. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you," Jonas said, "today, tomorrow, and for as long as I draw breath." "And I love you," Mei-Lin replied, "in this life and whatever comes after." They sat together as the stars began to appear overhead, listening to the sounds of their children inside and the whisper of wind through the pines. It was an ordinary moment in an extraordinary life, and Jonas felt gratitude wash over him like a benediction. He had come to Silver Creek 15 years ago looking for supplies. Instead, he had found a purpose, a family, and a love that transcended every boundary society tried to impose. He had found Mei-Lin, and in finding her, he had found himself. The years continued to unfold with their mix of challenges and joys. Chen Liang married the young woman he had been courting, a smart and hard-working girl named Emma, whose family had come west from Ohio. They settled in Silver Creek, where Chen ran a successful freight business, hauling goods between towns. He and Emma gave Jonas and Mei-Lin their first grandchildren, twin boys who were absolute terrors and whom Jonas adored completely. Lily shocked everyone by deciding to pursue education, determined to become a teacher. Jonas and Mei-Lin supported her ambitions, even though it meant she had to travel to a larger city for training. She returned 2 years later with a teaching certificate and a fierce determination to open a school that would serve all children, regardless of race or background. She eventually succeeded, running a small schoolhouse in Silver Creek that became known throughout the territory for its quality and inclusiveness. Sam chose to follow in his father's footsteps, learning the mountain man trade and eventually taking over most of Jonas's trap lines. But he also inherited his mother's business sense and his sister's progressive ideals. He established a fur trading company that dealt fairly with both trappers and buyers, earning a reputation for integrity that brought business from all over Montana territory. As Jonas and Mei-Lin entered their 50s and then their 60s, they gradually reduced their time in the mountains, spending more months in Silver Creek to be closer to their growing family. Jonas sold his original mountain cabin but kept the larger one they had built together, using it as a retreat during the summer months. Mei-Lin's old cabin in town, which they had maintained all these years, became their primary residence again. But the mountains never fully released their hold on Jonas. Even in his 70s, he would still make trips into the high country, though now accompanied by grandchildren who were learning the skills he had mastered decades ago. And Mei-Lin, though her joints ached more and her energy was not what it once was, still found peace in the mountain silences. On a warm June day in 1908, 30 years after Jonas had first heard men mocking a pregnant Chinese washerwoman in Silver Creek, he and Mei-Lin sat on the porch of their town cabin, surrounded by their extended family. Chen Liang and Emma were there with their 5 children. Lily had come with her husband and their 3 kids. Sam and his new wife were expecting their first child. The air was filled with laughter and conversation in English and Chinese, with children running everywhere and multiple generations mixing together. Sheriff Hollis, long retired but still sharp, stopped by to pay his respects. He was in his 80s now, moving slowly, but still maintaining the dignity that had made him an effective lawman. He shook Jonas's hand and kissed Mei-Lin's cheek, then surveyed the chaotic scene with satisfaction. "You two have built something remarkable," Hollis said. "Not just a family, though that is impressive enough. But you have changed this town, changed people's minds about what is possible. When you first got together, half the town thought it was a scandal. Now look around. Nobody bats an eye at mixed marriages anymore. Your grandchildren play with everyone else's grandchildren. That is your legacy." Jonas glanced at Mei-Lin, who smiled at him with the same warmth she had shown him for 3 decades. "We just lived our lives," Jonas said, "loved each other and raised our children the best we could." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Hollis replied. "Just being a good example, showing others that their prejudices are wrong. You have done that, and this town is better for it." After the family gathering dispersed and evening settled over Silver Creek, Jonas and Mei-Lin found themselves alone again. They moved slowly these days, their bodies bearing the marks of hard lives and advancing age. But their love had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, refined by years of partnership and mutual support. They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands intertwined, watching the lights come on in the neighboring cabins. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played and people laughed. Silver Creek had grown considerably over the decades, evolving from a rough mining town into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. "Do you have any regrets?" Jonas asked, a question that had been on his mind lately as he felt the weight of his years. Mei-Lin considered carefully, as she always did. "Small ones, perhaps. I wish I could have seen my family in China again, that they could have met you and the children. I wish the journey had not been so hard sometimes, that we could have been spared some of the pain." She paused, then squeezed his hand. "But no, I have no real regrets. Everything we endured made us who we are, and who we are, together, is something I would not change for anything." Jonas felt emotion clog his throat. Even after all these years, she could still move him with simple words of love and affirmation. "I feel the same way. That day I heard those men mocking you, I had no idea it would change my life. I was just a man who could not stand by and watch cruelty. But you changed everything, Mei-Lin. You took a broken, lonely man and made him whole." "We made each other whole," Mei-Lin corrected, as she always did when Jonas tried to give her too much credit. "That is what love does. It fills the empty places and heals the broken parts. We were both wounded when we found each other, but together, we healed." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in memories. Jonas thought about the young mountain man he had been, so certain that solitude was all he needed. How wrong he had been. And yet, if he had not spent those years alone in the mountains, he might not have recognized the gift Mei-Lin represented. Everything in his life had led him to that moment in Silver Creek when he had heard laughter and cruelty and had chosen to act. "I would do it all again," Jonas said finally. "Every hardship, every challenge, it was all worth it to have this life with you." "So would I," Mei-Lin agreed. She rested her head on his shoulder, and Jonas wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as the stars emerged overhead. They remained that way for a long time, two people who had defied convention and prejudice to build something beautiful and lasting. Their love had shaken the town once, forcing people to confront their own biases and assumptions. But more importantly, it had created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. As the night deepened and Silver Creek settled into sleep around them, Jonas and Mei-Lin went inside to the bed they had shared for 3 decades. They lay together in the darkness, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm they had learned over years of being together. "Good night, my love," Jonas whispered. "Good night," Mei-Lin replied. "Dream of the mountains." "Always," Jonas promised. "Always." They drifted into sleep, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of a life well lived, photographs of children and grandchildren, embroidered cloth from China, carved wooden animals, and 100 other reminders of the journey they had traveled together. Outside, the world continued its restless turning. But inside this cabin, 2 hearts rested in perfect peace, secure in a love that had conquered every obstacle and would endure beyond the boundaries of mortality itself. Jonas Mackenzie and Mei-Lin Chen. Mackenzie had started as strangers from different worlds. They had become partners, lovers, parents, and grandparents. They had faced hatred and prejudice, hardship and loss. And through it all, they had held tight to each other and the belief that love was stronger than any force that tried to tear them apart. It was a story worth telling, a life worth living, and a love worth celebrating. And as they slept peacefully in each other's arms, the mountains Jonas loved and the community Mei-Lin had helped build stood watch over them, guardians of a legacy that would last far beyond their own years. The morning sun rose over Silver Creek as it had for thousands of mornings before, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. And in a small cabin at the edge of town, Jonas and Mei-Lin woke to another day, another chance to love each other, another opportunity to prove that hearts know no boundaries when they beat as one. Their story had begun with an act of courage, had grown through commitment and sacrifice, and had blossomed into something that transcended the individuals who had created it. It was a testament to the power of love to transform not just individual lives but entire communities. And it was proof that sometimes the most profound changes start with a simple choice: to see another person's humanity and to defend it, no matter the cost. Jonas and Mei-Lin had made that choice 30 years ago in the dusty street of a mining town. And every day since, they had chosen love again and again, building a life that honored both of them and the cultures they came from. It was not always easy, and it was not always comfortable, but it was real and true and beautiful beyond measure. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.